My brother wronged you, then let me make it right. Be my wife, said the young man. No one believed him. At the very hour Amara Ndiaye was cast into the road, pregnant, humiliated, barefoot, and stripped of every ounce of dignity. The last person she expected to come forward was the brother of the man who had brought her disgrace. Yet there he was, Kofi Asare, standing between her and the shouting voices, the dust swirling around his boots, his jaw locked with quiet determination. It didn't seem real. The villagers blinked as though the sun had fooled them. Why would the righteous, mild-tempered Kofi, known for his honesty and calm spirit, take upon himself the shame his own brother had sown like poison? Why would any man marry the woman his family called cursed? They called it madness. He called it justice. But that declaration at the gate wasn't born from momentary pity. It had been forming quietly, deep inside him, through long nights when guilt clung to his chest heavier than the smell of the stables. He had watched in silence as his brother's deceit ruined a woman who had done nothing but believe in love. His conscience never rested after that day. Now, standing before her in the same yard that once echoed with Kwame's laughter, Kofi finally chose between blood and righteousness. This is the story of how a good man paid for another man's cruelty, with a promise of love that had once turned into shame. When Amara first met Kwame Asare, Kofi's older brother, the world still shimmered with possibility. She was young and hopeful, living with her widowed aunt and gathering nuts to sell at the market. Her feet were always dusted white with salt from the road, her hair tied back in a loose braid, her hands cracked but steady. People liked her quiet confidence, the way she turned hardship into song. Then Kwame appeared. He rode in on a white horse like the heroes from old stories, wearing the city's clean fabrics that smelled faintly of perfume and rain. He smiled like a man who owned the world and said her name as though it were something precious. Love, Amara believed, had finally remembered her. Each time he came, he brought gifts, fruits wrapped in leaves, ribbons, perfume from a shop she'd never see. Words came too, sweet, sticky, deliberate. You'll live in a big house, he promised. You'll never wash clothes for strangers again. Her heart, hungry for tenderness, fed on his promises. Beneath the cashew tree they met, whispering dreams that time itself could not hear without blushing. Amara saw herself in a white dress, standing before Pastor Embel, hearing his tired voice say, "True love is born of respect, not desire." But Kwame only understood desire, not respect. When she told him softly that new life was growing inside her, his expression changed like glass cracking under heat. The man who'd once called her my flower now called her a trap. Love turned into accusation overnight. "What nonsense is this?" he said. "Trying to chain me? To spoil my name?" He promised he would return to discuss it. He never did. Soon the whispers began. First from the women at the well, then through the market's narrow alleys. Each whisper grew sharp, sprouting thorns. Cursed, shameless, lost. No man's woman. Amara's heart broke, but her composure did not. She learned to walk through ridicule like someone crossing a field of thorns barefoot, carefully, silently, bleeding but upright. When Kwame's father heard of the pregnancy, he summoned her to the family farm to settle the matter. Clutching a thin shawl, Amara came trembling yet hopeful. Maybe the man she loved would defend her, even now. But on the wide veranda, all she met was scorn. "You dared bring shame to my household?" bellowed the old man. "No woman without pride sets her foot here again." She turned to Kwame, waiting for him to speak, to deny the cruelty hanging between them. He stood still, hands folded, eyes cold. He didn't utter a word, his silence louder than any insult. Something inside her broke without sound. Amara turned away. She walked out into the dusk as the wind carried her tears backward into the dust. The road stretched endlessly, red and cruel beneath the setting sun. Each step felt like carrying a stone in her chest. She reached the riverbank, knelt, washed her face, and whispered, "Lord, don't let shame be the end of my story." In Mamba village, news never traveled. It grew roots. Every tongue watered it with gossip until the lie looked truer than any truth. The women gossiped as they sewed. The men chuckled as they drank their palm wine. Kwame's name remained unsmudged. The village saw to that. A man's disgrace always found a woman's body to live in. Still, Amara bore her head high, her belly round with promise and loneliness. She whispered to the unborn life, "You are not their shame. You are my reason still to breathe." Time passed, and the sun glowed harsher, as if sharing the village's contempt. No one offered her shelter. Yet while the world mocked her scars, the heavens quietly sharpened their justice. preparing an answer that would arrive not with thunder, but with a gentle man's steady hands. That man was Kofi, the younger brother of Kwame. He had always carried himself differently, a quiet presence, a calm gaze that met people without judgment. Since his early teens, he had worked in the fields, sweating from sunrise to dusk. Calluses thicker than leather marked his palms, his strength fed by silence and faith. Their mother, before death took her, had told him, "A pure heart need not be loud or large. It only needs to keep its rhythm steady." That became his prayer. He'd seen Amara long before she knew it. When he passed her by the river carrying milk jugs, he noticed her laughter when a mango fell nearby, the soft tune she hummed while scrubbing clothes. She did not shine like the women in colorful markets, yet there was grace in the simplicity of her resilience. Respect held him back from speaking. After all, Kwame had claimed her love. When news reached him of her pregnancy, unwanted, publicly scorned, it was as if soil shifted beneath his feet. Mahamba talked endlessly. That girl's belly grows while the father disappears. Serves her right. What can you expect from a girl like her? Each word struck Kofi like sparks against dry grass. He tried to keep working, mending fences, herding cattle, but the words followed him everywhere. He couldn't escape the shadow of sharing his brother's name. The shame gnawed at him. At night he lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling while Kwame slept soundly one room away. In the dark, Kofi prayed, "Lord, give me courage to be just, even if justice costs me peace." From that night onward, something inside him changed. Work could no longer bury the ache. People at the farm noticed the difference. He rarely joined laughter. He grew quieter, slower to smile, as though every minute he was wrestling something invisible, but heavy. His father mistook it for laziness and gave him more chores. "Work cures soft hearts," the old man said. He didn't understand that the heart beating inside his younger son was anything but soft. It was a furnace forging resolve. One afternoon, hammering the blade of a plow, Kofi overheard two women gossiping by the road. "They say Amara sleeps hungry," one said. "She barely has a roof," added the other. "And still she walks upright. Pride doesn't feed the belly," he froze. The tool slid from his hand into the dust. Rising, he felt something hot coil in his chest. Not anger alone, but shame, and grief, and a new kind of strength that didn't tremble. "If justice won't come from the strong," he murmured, "then it must come from someone simple." That was the moment silence ceased to be enough. In the following days, he watched his family more carefully. The harsh judgment in his father's tone whenever Amara's name came up. Quame's smug grin each time gossip reached the yard. Kofi saw clearly now, one man spoiled by privilege, another hardened by pride. He looked at his own hands, cracked and clean, and decided they were still capable of doing something right. At night, he returned to his mat, sleep forsaking him again. The crickets sang outside as if urging him forward. The thought of Amara out there, alone, grew unbearable. Deep inside, he made his choice, even if he didn't yet know how to speak it. When dawn's first wind crept through the window, Kofi rose. The horizon was still ink-dark, the stars fading slowly, yet one star lingered longer than the rest, bright, stubborn, refusing to disappear. He stood beneath it in silence, knowing some lights stay, just to guide the righteous who dare step out of line. The sky was still dark, but one star shone brighter than the rest. Kofi stood watching, eyes wet, and remembered his mother's words. "When the star doesn't sleep, it's because God is awake, watching what man tries to hide." He felt a lump in his throat. He decided he could no longer stand by, watching Amara's pain as if it were rain falling on the neighbor's roof. It was time to face the shame of his brother and the cowardice of his own silence. From that moment on, Kofi carried within himself a quiet promise to do something that would restore lost honor. Not the honor of the family name, but the honor of truth. Heck knew the path would be hard, that his father wouldn't understand, that people would mock him. But time teaches that some battles the soul must fight alone. And that morning, as the rooster crowed for the first time, Kofi understood that the justice that doesn't come from the law must be born in the heart. The same heart that in silence had begun to beat for Amar's fate. It was market day in the village. The sun was already high, and the smell of fried cassava mixed with the sounds of voices, chickens, and distant drums. People from all around came to sell and buy, and the central square filled with colors and chatter. It was in this setting that Amara's shame became a spectacle. She had come to sell some vegetables, the little she managed to grow on a borrowed patch of land behind her aunt's house. She carried the basket on her head, carefully balancing her body. But the stairs weighed heavier than the basket itself. In the middle of the square appeared the man who had promised love and left only ruin behind. He rode a gleaming horse surrounded by friends who flattered him, laughing loudly and bragging. When he saw Amara, he pretended not to recognize her, but a spiteful woman whispered something in his ear, and he stopped the horse. The laughter died down. Wayne dismounted and walked toward her with his chest puffed, and the look of someone who thinks he owns the fate of others. Those nearby felt the air shift. The murmurs ceased. What happened next would be etched into the village's memory. "You still have the nerve to show up here," he said loudly, so everyone could hear with that belly and that fake face. Amara lowered her gaze. Her hands trembled, but held tightly to the basket. "Respect Mekame," she replied in a faint voice. He laughed a scornful laugh. "Respect is for those who have shame. You're not even worth the dust you walk on." The people around fell silent. Some looked down, others whispered. An old man tried to intervene, saying that wasn't how a woman should be treated, but Kame ignored him. Amara remained standing, unmoving with the dignity of someone who knows that if she falls, the whole world will trample her. From across the market, Kofi watched the scene. He was helping a neighbor unload sacks of corn when he heard his brother's voice ring out when he saw Amara surrounded. His blood boiled. He wanted to run to her, but his body hesitated. Their father, who was also nearby, watched silently, wearing the cold expression of someone who believes dishonor should be exposed. "This is how you clean the family name," the old man muttered, satisfied. But inside Kofi, rage mixed with shame. He could no longer stand the prideful performance they called honor. Wayne continued the attack. He grabbed the basket from Amara's hands and dumped it on the ground. Leaves and roots scattered, trampled by the crowd. "Here's what's left of your worth," he shouted. Amara didn't reply. She simply knelt down slowly to gather what remained while the dust of the market stained her knees and the tip of her scarf. The sun burned, her heart pounded heavily, but she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered softly, "God sees." That was enough to cast silence over the square. The phrase sounded like a muffled thunderclap, announcing what was yet to come. Kofi took a few steps forward, but his father grabbed his arm. "Stay out of it," he said firmly. "She already got what she deserved." Kofi looked at him, feeling a nod rise in his throat. Deserved, he thought. Who deserves to be humiliated like that just for trusting too much? The old man didn't notice, but at that moment, he lost his son's respect. The young man pulled away and watched from a distance, powerless, as Amara picked up her basket, her eyes empty, her body bent, but her spirit still standing. When she rose, she adjusted her scarf, looked at the ground, and simply said, "God will weigh every word aim." Then she walked away slowly with the steady stride of someone who's lost everything except her faith. The crowd made way for her, but no one dared touch her. It was as if the very air around Amara was saying, "Don't touch her. She carries the truth." Kofi stood frozen, fists clenched, his chest burning. He saw his brother laughing, his friends patting him on the back, and his father nodding with approval. He felt ashamed of the blood that ran through his veins. And there, in the middle of that square, he swore to himself he would never allow such injustice again. News of the humiliation spread quickly. That night around homes and fires, everyone talked about what had happened. Some said Amara had been punished by God. Others in silence knew the punishment was still to come. Not for her, but for those who mocked another's suffering. Heaven's justice is slow, but it never fails. And Kofi, sitting at the doorstep of his house, looked out at the dark horizon and thought of Amara's words. God sees, yes, God saw, and what men fail to see, he corrects in time. It was there, in the echo of that marketplace, that destiny began to shift, because no humiliation goes unanswered when it's innocence that bleeds. Evening fell over the village like a veil of ashes. The tired sun hid behind the palm trees, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth mixed with the dust stirred by amorous footsteps. She walked along the dirt road without looking back. The scarf covering her head could no longer hide the exhaustion on her face, and her bare feet left deep marks in the mud. Each step was a farewell to the house, to hope, to the little dignity that remained. The silence around her was heavy. Only the dry sound of cicadas and her muffled sobs could be heard. Further back, Kofi came in a hurry. He ran, but with the care of someone afraid to scare away. Since the scene at the market, something had been burning inside him. The words of humiliation spoken by Calm echoed like a whip. Amara's face kneeling on the ground before the crowd wouldn't leave his mind. God sees, she had said, and that phrase would not let him rest. He knew that if he stayed silent, he'd be complicit in the same injustice that wounded him so deeply. His father had tried to stop him from leaving, shouting that it wasn't his concern, but Kofi answered only with a look. For the first time, the obedient son had chosen to disobey when he saw her in the distance. His heart raced, his body ached from the effort, but his soul seemed to be guided by something greater. Amara stopped when she heard the footsteps. She turned slowly, her eyes red from so much crying, her face covered in dust. For a moment, she thought he'd come to scold her too. Like all the others, she clutched the scarf to her chest, bracing for yet another harsh word. But Kofi said nothing. He stopped in front of her, breathless, and simply looked. Not at her belly, not at the torn clothes, but into her eyes. And in them, he saw the strength of a woman who had endured the impossible without losing her faith. "Why do you follow me?" Amara asked, her voice from exhaustion. "Haven't they said enough? Do you want to see how far my shame goes?" Kofi shook his head. "I didn't come for him or for what they say. I came for you," she laughed bitterly. "For me? No one comes for me, Kofi. When a woman is wounded, everyone watches, but no one reaches out a hand." He took a step forward. The wind blew harder, lifting dust between them. And in that moment, the silence became sacred. Kofi spoke softly, but firmly as someone who speaks from the heart, not the mouth. "If he humiliated you, I honor you. Be my wife." Time seemed to stop. Amara widened her eyes, unable to believe what she had just heard. The tears, which no longer had strength to fall, returned to her eyes. "Don't say that, Kofi," she whispered, almost begging. "You don't know what you're saying. They will mock you. Your family will cast you out." He lifted his chin, gazed unwavering. "I'd rather lose my blood than lose my honor." The road, until then, filled only with silence and pain, became witness to a gesture no one had expected. The sun set completely, and the first stars appeared, shy as if watching the scene. Amara tried to respond, but her voice failed. She had never imagined hearing words of love after so much scorn. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said at last. Kofi stepped closer and replied, deserving his man's measure. "Justice belongs to God." For a moment she wanted to believe it was real. Her heart beat out of rhythm, a mix of fear and hope. It was as if suddenly the world could breathe again, but with it came the weight of guilt. "And your father, your brother, what will they say about you?" she asked. Kofi sighed deeply. "They'll say whatever they want. All I know is that I can't let evil speak louder than good." A distant thunder cut through the sky and clouds began to gather. The scent of rain filled the air. Amara looked upward, then at Kofi. For the first time in a long while, she saw no judgment in someone's eyes, only truth. A simple gesture, yet capable of rewriting destinies. "If you are a man of your word, I will respect you until the end of my days," she said. Kofi replied without hesitation. "My word is all I have, and today before God I give it to you." The rain fell gently, washing the dust from the road. The two of them stood there in silence until night wrapped around them. The village, far away, still spoke Amara's name with disdain. But there, among thunder and promises, something was born that no one could understand. A love that didn't ask for beauty or convenience, only justice. In that moment, destiny changed direction. What began as compassion turned into courage, and in Omar's heart, for the first time, shame gave way to hope. The next morning, the village woke up to news that spread like wildfire. Kofi, the younger brother, had asked for Amara's hand in marriage. At first, no one believed it. They thought it was just gossip from some loose tongue. But once the sun climbed a little higher, and the first neighbors confirmed what they had seen on the road, the rumor turned into scandal. Women gathered in groups in front of houses. Men stopped working to comment. The boys lost his mind. Some said, "How can he marry the woman his brother dishonored?" Others murmured, shaking their heads in disapproval. At the market, Kofi's name was whispered in low voices, always followed by sighs and grimaces. The same village that had done nothing to defend Amara when she was humiliated, now armed itself as judge of someone else's fate. Pastor Embel, a man of calm faith and deep voice, tried to soothe the outrage. "God writes in lines men don't understand," he said, but few were listening. Anger, prejudice, and family shame spoke louder than reason. In the big house on the farm, Kofi's father, old Naim, was furious. He paced back and forth, face red, cane striking the floor with every word. "My own son bringing disgrace into this house, marrying the woman who stained the family name. This is madness. Kofi, madness." The young man stood firm, not lowering his eyes. "Father, there is no disgrace in righting a wrong. The shame isn't on her. It's on the one who humiliated her." Leaning against the wall, watch the scene with the smug smile of someone who believes he is untouchable. "Let it be, father," he said with irony. "His heart's too soft. Always has been. He'll learn the hard way what shame feels like." Kofi took a deep breath. "Better to carry the shame of men than the weight of guilt before God." The old man slammed his cane against the ground. "If you go through with this, you're dead to me." The silence that followed was thick like fog. With eyes brimming, Kofi replied, "Then let me die to you, but not to the truth." He left the house without looking back. The sound of the cane on the floor still echoed when he disappeared around the bend in the road. Meanwhile, Amara remained secluded at her aunt's house, not knowing what fate had in store. When Kofi arrived, she was on her knees, arranging the baby clothes for the child not yet born. She jumped up, startled when she saw him enter. "What are you doing here? Your father will curse you." He stepped closer slowly. "He already has," he said with a sad smile. "But still I'm at peace. If it's a sin to honor what the world despises, then I accept the punishment." Amara was silent for a few seconds. Then the tears began to fall. "You don't understand the weight of this. Kofi, the village will turn its back on you. Noon will respect you." He took her hands in his. Respect that's lost for doing what's right was never real. She lowered her head, moved. In that moment, she felt she was no longer alone. The weight of shame now seemed to be shared. And for the first time since the humiliation, Amara breathed without pain. A few days later, the two were married in a small ceremony performed by Pastor Mbel. There was no celebration, no guests, just the sound of crickets and the scent of wildflowers. The pastor, emotional, blessed the couple with a simple phrase, "May your love be the testimony the self-righteous still lack." Kofi replied only with a calm look, and Amara, wearing an improvised veil, let a single tear fall shining. In the light of the oil lamp dot in the village news of the wedding. Sparkdanger and mockery, some claimed it was witchcraft, others that Kofi had lost his mind, but the young man never defended himself. He kept working. The land, building his home with his own hands. "I'd rather lose my blood than my honor," he would say every time someone confronted him. Over time, even those who had mocked him began to respect his silence. However, couldn't stand the thought that his brother had done what he himself never had the courage to do. At night he drank and cursed, repeating that Kofi only wanted to steal his name. But deep down he knew his brother had taken something greater than pride, the right to be just. And so amid whispers and side glances, a love was born that defied the entire village. A love not announced with music or flowers, but with the weight of courage and the scent of truth. The scandal passed, but the story remained, because when a man chooses to walk with a clean heart, the noise of others becomes nothing more than wind. Kofi and Amara's wedding took place on a cloudy morning, simple and quiet, just like their lives. Pastor Embel arrived with his Bible wrapped in an old cloth and the serene smile of someone who sees beyond appearances. In the packed, dirty yard, two witnesses, an elderly neighbor, and her nephew watched in silence. There was no music, no celebration, only the sound of wind rustling the coconut palms and the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. Amara wore a light blue cloth so often washed it had lost its color. Kofi wore his work shirt clean but frayed at the sleeves. When the pastor joined their hands, he said, "Some weddings begin in ballrooms, and some begin in promises before God. Let this be the second." After the blessing, Amara looked at her husband and felt the weight of the choice he had made. It was a love born of courage, and courage does not dress in gold, but in faith. They walked side by side to the small plot where they would build their home. Kofi had already raised the first walls of mud and straw. Amara looked around, seeing more emptiness than shelter, but in his eyes she saw something the world could not knock down: determination. "It'll Besmal, but it'll be ours," he said, and she nodded, holding back the tear that insisted on falling. The first months were hard. The people of the village still looked at them with suspicion. At the market, when Amara showed up to sell her vegetables, conversations would fall silent for a moment. The women whispered. The men pretended not to see. She endured it all quietly, remembering the pastor's words. Whoever carries the truth carries both a cross and a crown. At night, when she returned home, she would find Kofi tending to the garden, his body bent, his face shining with sweat. "One day they'll understand," he would say, and Amara would softly reply, "Even if they don't, God will see." A simple life taught them to share what little they had. Over time, the land began to bear fruit, and the mud shack became a home. Amar's child was born strong, and Kofi received him in his arms with tear-filled eyes. "This boy will never grow up ashamed of who he is," he whispered. They named him Yao, a name meaning born on a Thursday. For according to tradition, children born that day carry the spirit of hope. Still, the struggles didn't end. Kofi's father remained silent, telling those who asked that he no longer had two sons. Meanwhile, would walk past the couple's house with his chin held high, pretending to feel nothing. But inside, a discomfort grew each day, seeing the brother he once called weak finding peace. And prospering was a wound his pride couldn't hide. One afternoon, Amar went to the well to fetch water. Two women laughed as she passed, and one of them mocked. "Look at the wife of the brother of the lover." Amara didn't reply. She simply filled the bucket, placed it on her head, and walked back carrying a dignity that cannot be taught, only born. At home, Kofi noticed a tired look in her eyes and asked what had happened. She shook her head and said, "Nothing that faith can't heal." He wiped her face with his work cloth and answered, "As long as the heart is clean, the stones on the road don't hurt so much." Time passed, and the house that once barely held the two of them began to echo with a child's laughter. The mud walls, cracked from the sun, held stories of resilience. Sometimes at night, Amara would light an oil lamp and look at her sleeping husband, thinking of how much that love had cost, but how much it had given in return: respect, shelter, and the sense that shame had been purified by courage. On Sunday, when Pastor Embel visited the couple, he brought with him a word that sounded like prophecy. The fruits born of pain are the sweetest, because no one believes flowers can bloom from cracked ground. Amara smiled in silence. Destiny would still bring its trials, but in that moment, beneath a humble roof and the scent of rain, life was already giving back what injustice had stolen: peace. Time passed slowly over that land. The seasons changed, but the memory of the old humiliation still lingered in the corners of the village. Amara and Kofi lived with simplicity and faith, sustained by work and prayer. The garden grew. Their son crawled over the earthen floor, and the sun rose each morning like a quiet promise that life, despite its scars, could still be good. But along the roads that led to the village, a figure walked with heavy steps. It was Ame, the older brother, returning after months away, his arrogance wounded and his eyes hardened by pride. Had lost what he valued most, the people's admiration. After the scandal, his business began to crumble. The friends who once surrounded him drifted away and debt pushed him far from home. When the money ran out, all he had left was the bitter memory of the power he once thought eternal. That was when he decided to return, telling himself he wanted a fresh start. But deep down, he still carried the same poison of the past: the desire to possess what he could no longer have. On the afternoon, he appeared at Kofi's doorstep. The sky was overcast. Amara was washing clothes in the basin, and the sound of water slapping against the stones mixed with Yao's crying. When she looked up, she saw the man standing at the gate. For a moment, her blood ran cold. The memory of the day he cast her out of the farm came back in full. The words, the laughter, the shame. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled, but it was a smile without peace. "I came to see what's left of me." "Amara," he replied. Kofi arrived shortly after, carrying a bundle of firewood on his shoulders. When he saw his brother, he stopped a few steps away. The silence between them was as thick as the air before a storm. "Did you come to reclaim what you lost?" Kofi asked, calm but firm, looked away in faint humility. "I came to ask for forgiveness, brother. I did wrong. I admit it. I just want to fix what I destroyed." Amara remained silent, her eyes sharp, like someone who knows that easy repentance is often the mask of wounded pride. Continued, "What happened? Between us shouldn't have gone that way. I was young, foolish, and let myself be guided by what I didn't understand." Kofi dropped the firewood to the ground and replied, "Foolishness is the excuse of those who refuse to look in the mirror." His brother swallowed hard but kept up the act. "I still love her," he said suddenly, pointing to Amara. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Time passed, but the feeling remained. "She was mine before she was yours." Amara took a step back, her face pale, her heart racing. Kofi took a deep breath, walked forward until he stood between them, and answered firmly, "Those who wounded no longer have the right to touch." Tried to laugh, but the sound came out weak. "You're willing to lose everything for her." Kofi stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I already lost enough the first time I stayed silent. I won't lose again what heaven gave me to protect." The rain began to fall gently, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away the words. Quain stood frozen without the courage to reply. Kofi's gaze, calm and steady, disarmed him more than any shout ever could. Amara, standing beside her child, watched in silence. The scene was a mirror of the justice life had finally brought. The man who once called her shame now bowed before the dignity she'd rebuilt with faith and love. After a few seconds, Aim lowered his head and walked away, his footsteps fading into the mud. Kofi watched until he disappeared among the trees. Only then did he turn to Amara, who was still trembling. He touched her shoulder gently and said, "Do not fear. Evil may return to the door, but it never enters where truth lives." She took a deep breath and replied, "When evil returns, it finds what it lost: our faith." That night, as the wind beat against the windows, Amara sat in silence, remembering everything she had lived through. The old pain no longer hurt the same way. Now each memory was like Askar that, instead of shaming, told a story. Kofi, lying beside her, gently ran his hand through her hair and said, Time reveals who is a man and who is just. Amara smiled. Eyes misty, and time has already shone, she replied. Outside, the rain began to ease, and the frog's song seemed to announce peace had returned to that home. The days following Quame's visit brought a strange silence over the village. It felt as though the wind carried secrets between the houses, and the brothers' names spread in whispers. Some said the older one had returned a changed man. Others claimed his remorse was nothing but a performance. But for Amara and Kofi, Kwa's return was more than a rumor. It was a ghost hovering over the little piece they had fought to build. That week, Kofi began working later into the evening, perhaps to keep from thinking. The hoe striking the earth was the only sound that accompanied him. At night, he sat at the doorway, quietly watching Hisson sleep in Amara's arms. She could see the weariness in her husband's eyes, but said nothing. She knew the battle he was fighting now was invisible, a war between blood and conscience. His brother's presence had reopened an old wound, and Kofi felt the weight of carrying a name that shared the same blood, but not the same soul. One night, Amara found him sitting in the yard, staring at the horizon. The oil lamp flickered nearby, and the moon sliced the sky with its half. I can't get him out of my mind, he confessed. I feel like there's still poison in his words. Amara sat beside him and answered calmly. The poisons of the world only kill when we keep them inside. Let God handle the rest. Kofi sighed. But what if he comes back? What if he tries to tear us apart again? She looked at him with tenderness and said, Those who live truthfully don't fear the return of the past. What is ours has already been blessed. Despite his wife's words, Kofi's heart remained restless. His family was divided. His father, old Naim, still refused to see him. He told neighbors he no longer had a younger son. Some relatives embarrassed by Kofi's actions had stopped speaking to him. He defied his blood, betrayed his own name, they said. But there were also those who admired him in silence. The women of the village, especially the elders, saw in Kofi a different kind of man. One who'd returned dignity to a woman the world had discarded. He is just, they whispered through their windows. God will reward him. The tension in the family grew when Kwam, with nowhere to go, began wandering near their land. He claimed to be looking for shelter, said he wanted to work alongside his brother. Kofi knew there was more pride than repentance in his return. Still, he didn't drive him away. Sometimes evil needs to see good up close to understand what it destroyed, he told himself. Amara, on the other hand, suffered in silence. At night, she whispered prayers, asking God to bring peace to their home and keep away the temptations that still hovered around their days. One afternoon, as Amara returned from the river, she found Kwame sitting by the roadside. He looked worn, unshaven, his eyes red. I need to speak with you, he said. Amara hesitated, her heart raced, and the weight of the past pressed against her chest. There's nothing left to say, Am, he insisted. There is. I want you to know I regret it. I was a fool. I lost what mattered most. His words sounded sincere, but his eyes still held a shadow. Too late, she replied. What you lost wasn't mine. It was your honor, and that can only be regained with time. Kwame lowered his head, speechless. When Kofi arrived, he saw the scene and understood immediately. He stood before his brother and said only, Don't provoke the past. Time has already judged it. His words were calm, but heavy. The elder brother rose slowly and walked away, his eyes empty, his body bent with defeat. Amara exhaled deeply like someone freed from a burden. Kofi placed his hand gently on her shoulder and said, It's not blood that makes us brothers. It's what we do with it. That night the rain returned, light and steady. The fire flickered inside the small house, casting shadows on the clay walls. Amara sat near her son and looked at Kofi. He was silent, but his expression was lighter, as if he had finally found peace within himself. Time, Amara, he said, is the only judge that never makes mistakes. She nodded, watching their son sleep, and time has already begun its judgment. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves and carried away the last echoes of resentment. The house, still humble, was filled with something neither shame nor pain could steal. Serenity, because love, when it is born clean, can bear even the weight of the hardest choices, and in the end, it prevails. The years passed like wind over the cassava fields, slow yet steady. The life of Amara and Kofa remained simple, steadfast, and full of small miracles that only the eyes of faith could see. The land, once dry and stubborn, began to bear abundant fruit. The harvests were good, and the house, once made of raw clay, now had reinforced walls and a new roof built by Kofi's own hands. Young Yao grew strong with his father's calm gaze and his mother's kindness. In the village, time slowly began to turn judgment into respect. The neighbors, who once crossed the street to avoid greeting them, now stopped by to buy vegetables, ask for advice, or simply listen to Kofi's wise words. Amara, who once walked with lowered eyes, now held her head high, her scarf tied neatly and a gentle smile on her face. She was respected not out of pity, but for her strength. That woman didn't bow to shame, the elder women would say. She's the one who taught the village what dignity looks like. In the small field, Amara tended the rows of beans with the same devotion she gave to her home. She hummed old psalms as she watered the soil, and sometimes when the sun set, she looked up at the sky and said, "God's timing is like the rain. It comes when the earth is ready." Kofi, hearing her from a distance, would smile. He knew that peace hadn't come easy. It was the cost of many tears and a love that endured mockery and loneliness. One afternoon, Pastor Embel paid them a visit. He was older now, his face marked by time, but this voice still strong. He sat in the shade of the cashew tree and watched Yao playing with a piece of wood. "You've turned suffering into a living prayer," he said. "The village speaks of your harvest, but what you've sown goes deeper. You've shown that forgiveness is the fruit of faith." Kofi bowed his head, moved. "Pastor, there were times I thought God had gone silent." The old man smiled. "He never goes silent, my son. He just speaks at the right time when the heart is ready to listen." The days that followed were filled with gratitude. The fields blossomed and the animals multiplied. The work was hard, but there was joy in every gesture. Kofi treated Amara's son as if he were his own flesh and blood. There was never any distinction, never any difference. "Your father is the one who teaches you what honor is, not the one who gives you a name," he would say to the boy. Yao grew up hearing these words, and in them he learned what it meant to be a true man. Not the one who shouts, but the one who walks upright. Little by little, even the most skeptical began to admire the transformation of that home. The women passing by their house would say to one another, "She was the humiliated girl. Now she's the one who teaches the village to have faith." The men, once quick judge, now respected Kofi as someone whose word was worth more than gold. His father, old Naim, though he wouldn't admit it, began to feel the weight of his silence. He no longer left his house. He said little, but his eyes carried the burden of regret. One morning, hearing that his youngest son was passing by his fence, Naim called out to him. His voice was weak but sincere. "Kofi, time has shown me that those who follow the truth never lose their way." Kofi approached without resentment and replied, "There's still time to walk the right path." "Father," the old man nodded, tears in his eyes. It was the first gesture of reconciliation since their falling out. That night, Amara gave thanks in prayer, sitting on the porch with Yao asleep in her arms. She whispered, "Lord, you didn't give me riches, but you gave me something greater, a home without lies." Kofi heard her and replied, "And a love that grew even when the world tried to rip it out." The wind blew gently, rustling the cashew tree's leaves. It was as if all of nature celebrated their new beginning. That year's harvest was their best yet, and when they shared part of it with the neighbors, many were moved to tears. Omra would say, "Those who sow in pain reaped with gratitude. The faith that sustained them when all seemed lost, now bloomed in full view of everyone." The village, once marked by judgment, had become witness to a quiet miracle. Goodness, when it's sincere, can be humiliated, but never defeated. Because love, when born of faith, grows even in the driest of soils, and one day it always blooms before the eyes of those who once doubted. Time, which so often feels slow for the just, is swift and merciless for the proud. Wame, the eldest brother, learned this the hardest way. After losing his father's respect and the village's admiration, he tried to rebuild his life elsewhere. He bought cattle, invested in trade, and married a wealthy woman who secretly despised him. But nothing prospered. Wherever he went, something seemed to go wrong. Money vanished, business partners deceived him, and friends disappeared one by one like leaves swept away by the wind. For a while, Quame pretended nothing was happening. He kept his proud posture, his clean clothes, his confident voice. But inside, his pride was crumbling. At night, he stared at the ceiling and remembered the words he once said to Amara. Words that now burned his soul. "You're not even worth the dust you walk on." That phrase came back like an echo, and every time it replayed in his mind, he felt the weight of the curse he had called down upon himself. One day his wife left him. She took what remained of his fortune and left behind only a cold letter. "I can't live with a man who has lost his own shadow." He was left alone, surrounded by empty land and debts that grew like weeds. He tried to resist, to sell what little he had left, but nothing obeyed him anymore. The rain stopped. The cattle died, and the house, once a symbol of power, fell into ruin. The man who once commanded the fates of others now had no command even over his own name. When misery finally overtook him completely, Wame thought of his brother and Amara. He spent nights wrestling with pride until overcome by hunger and loneliness. he decided to return to the village. He walked 4 days. His feet blistered, his body thin, his eyes dimmed. When he arrived, nothing remained of his former arrogance. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, and the man who once thought himself lord of the truth was now just another beggar lost on the roads of life. At the end of a rainy afternoon, Quame knocked on the door of a humble house. The same house where years earlier he had declared that shame had found shelter. Amara opened the door. For a moment she didn't recognize him. His face was distorted by sorrow and guilt. "Amara, it's me," he said, voice trembling. She stood in silence, her heart torn between the past and compassion. Kofi appeared shortly after, wiping his hands with a cloth. When he saw his brother, he didn't flinch or step back, lowered his head. "I have nowhere else to go," he murmured. "The world has taken everything from me. I've come to ask for shelter, even if just for one night." Kofi stood silent for a few seconds, observing the broken man before him. Then he opened the door and said, "The one who wounded has no right to command, but can still learn how to ask for forgiveness." He motioned for him to come in. Wami took 2 steps inside, and when he saw Yao playing in the corner of the room, his heart tightened. He remembered the past, what he had destroyed, and fell to his knees. "I caused too much pain," he murmured. Kofi helped him up and said, "Pain is the price of arrogance, but forgiveness is the remedy for a man who learns." Amara, with no trace of bitterness, served him food. The silence that followed was heavy but peaceful, the kind of peace that arrives when pride finally dies. In the days that followed, Wami stayed, helping in the fields, quietly. The hands that once never touched a hoe now worked tirelessly. The villagers, seeing him, whispered in surprise, "The lion became a lamb." And indeed, the man who once made others bow now bent over the earth, reaping what he had never sown. Humility. One morning, while they carried sacks of corn, Kofi approached and said, "Life doesn't punish Kwame. It teaches what you call a fall. I call a lesson." His brother nodded, tears running down his face. "Now I understand what real love is," he replied, his voice breaking. Years later, when Kam fell ill and could no longer work, it was Kofi who cared for him until the very end. The man who once humiliated him passed away in silence with a calm gaze, and at the final moment he whispered just one phrase: "Goodness wins without shouting." That day, Amara lit a candle at the front of the house and said to Kofi, "God's justice doesn't need applause. It comes at the right time." And the wind that swept over the field seemed to carry away the last breath of arrogance that once ruled there. The whole village, once so quick to judge, had learned a lesson that would never be forgotten. Pride may rise high, but it's the just heart, even in silence, that touches the heavens. The years went by, and the story of Amara and Kofi became a living legend in the village. What had begun in pain and humiliation ended as a testament of faith and dignity. The simple house, built on a foundation of clay, became a symbol of a love that survived shame, judgment, and poverty. It was common to see travelers stopping by the roadside just to rest, beneath the cashew tree Kofi had planted the day he married Amara. It said the shade of that tree held something different, a peace that came not only from nature, but from the hearts of those who had lived there with truth. The village, once quick to judge, now spoke Amora's name with respect. The women, especially the elders, saw in her a reflection of themselves. The girl who was once humiliated became an example. They said it was faith that sustained her and love that redeemed her. Amara never saw herself as a heroine. She still woke before sunrise, lit the fire, prepared meals, and cared for what was hers with the humility of someone who understands that greatness lives in the smallest things. Kofi, now gay-head, still carried the same serenity in his eyes. He never sought recognition. "Justice doesn't need applause," he would say. "It fulfills itself in silence." When he walked through the marketplace, the younger-ones greeted him with respect, and even those who once criticized him now called him a role model. With time, life had taught the village what arrogance never could: the value of a just heart. Yao, the son Kofi raised as his own, grew up strong and wise. He inherited his father's patience and his mother's tenderness. When he turned 20, he decided to study in the city but promised to return. Before leaving, he told Amara, "Everything I know about goodness I learned here." Watching silence overcome shouting, she smiled proudly and replied, "Take with you what the world needs most: respect and faith." Sometime later, old Naim passed away. Kofi mourned him without bitterness. He cried not for the father who had rejected him, but for the man who in the end acknowledged his mistake. "Blood can fail," he murmured at the grave, "but forgiveness never does." And Amara beside him squeezed his hand. In that simple gesture lay the confirmation of everything they had lived. Life can be harsh, but true love does not bow to pride. The years that followed were peaceful. The farm prospered. The fields turned green. And Kofi's name came to be remembered with admiration. When people told his story, they didn't speak of tragedy, but of triumph. They say God took his time. They would say, but he came not with thunder or punishment, but with quiet justice. Amara grew old with grace. Her wrinkled face held the beauty of a woman who had lived with purpose. In her final days, she often sat at the door of the house, watching the sunset, reflecting on all she had endured. Sometimes neighbors would come by seeking advice. She would smile and say, "There is no shame that lasts forever. Only what's true endures." When she passed, the entire village came to a halt. The church bell rang slowly, and Pastor Mbell, now very old, spoke with a trembling voice. "Today, we say goodbye to a woman who taught us what faith without words truly is." Kofi, tears in his eyes, replied, "She taught me that love is born when compassion is stronger than fear." After that, life followed its natural course. The cashew tree grew even taller, its shade stretching over the entire road. It was there beneath that tree that the villagers would tell the story of Amara and Kofi to new generations. The children listened and chanted while the elders sighed, remembering that fate can be cruel but never unjust. The village finally learned the greatest lesson of all. Goodness doesn't need to shout to win. It triumphs in silence. Like the sunrise after the storm, Amara and Kofi became part of the people's memory. An eternal reminder that pure love, even when wounded, always blooms again. And so in that land that once knew shame was etched to truth, time could never erase. Faith is not noise, it is a seed. And when the heart is just, it always finds the right moment to bloom. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one.